Put it on there. I have 6:02.
Go team.
All right.
Everybody good? Good evening and welcome to the September 5th, 2019 City of West Sacramento Planning Commission meeting. Tonight we're going to start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask Commissioner Austin to lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If you'd like to address the commission this evening, there are comment cards on the side table over there. If you want to make any comments on matters that are not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission, please put the agenda number A, or agenda letter A. And just to notice, some individuals may be uncomfortable speaking on television or in public, so respect at all time, no cheering or booing. Thank you. Moving to general administration function number A, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within
Vice Chair Liebig, do we need to take roll, or?
Do I need to take roll? No?
Do we?
Just making sure we have.
We never take roll.
Okay, I must be out, I'm sorry.
Commission is prohibited from discussing items that are not on our agenda, but this is time for individuals to bring matters up, and at this time I have none. So moving on to general administration function B, correspondence and staff communication from Planning Commissioner Secretary Mr. Tilley.
Yes, Mr. Liebig, thank you. Just real quick from last night's city council meeting. They did conduct a first reading on the implementing ordinance for the development agreement for the cannabis testing laboratory that was here before the commission, I think 1 or 2 meetings ago. So that one will proceed to second reading, I think on the first October meeting. And then the other cannabis item that the commission considered and approved at our last meeting was scheduled to be heard by the city council last night. But in the intermeeting time between the planning commission hearing and last night, the applicants actually requested that be continued. And so we continued it to a date uncertain, as we're still not clear why they wish to have a continuance on that particular item. This was the one on Front Street. So depending on how that one plays out, it may need to return to Planning Commission, depending on if ultimately substantive changes are requested that would take it out of the bounds of what the commission saw at our last meeting. So stay tuned on that one, and we'll have an update for you on that particular project once we know something at staff level. I'd also like to recognize tonight that our intern, who is on a hiatus with us right now, but hopefully will be returning in spring, is present with us tonight, Ms. Cheyenne Daniel, and she has brought 2 of her classmates here to hear a presentation tonight. So I'd like to recognize her in the audience. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. We can do it in general. Okay. Item C, disclosure of ex parte communication. Just looking to my left, these are all city workshops. So.
Nothing to report?
Okay.
Nothing to report?
Nothing to report? No.
I mean, I've spoken with city staff on these topics, but quite some time ago, not directly related to the staff report items, but to the topics generally covered by both items 2 and 3.
Okay, thank you. Consideration and approval of the minutes from the August 15th commission meeting.
Motion approved. Second.
I'm sorry, moved by Sternfelds and seconded by Leonard. Commissioner Leonard. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Sorry, unanimous. Thanks. Moving on to the regular agenda, number 2. This is a public workshop and presentation on the Washington Specific Plan update. Ms. Allen?
Good evening, Vice Chair Liebig and members of the commission. Tonight's item is an introductory workshop on the updates to the Washington Specific Plan. We will be having a much more detailed presentation for you at the next meeting that will be conducted by the consultants working with the city. But we just wanted to give you a little introductory remarks tonight in prelude to that. Next slide. So the Washington boundaries, in case you're not aware, are the Sacramento River on the east, Tower Bridge Gateway on the south, A Street on the north, and the boundary that kind of varies encompasses a portion of 6th Street, Sacramento Avenue, and 8th Street. The Washington District is the oldest portion of the city. The original lots were plotted out in the mid-1800s. It has a mature tree canopy, a grid street system, and many different forms of architecture. Next. Since 1996, when the Washington Specific Plan was originally adopted by the city, it's really remained in its original form without any modifications to it. Since that time, the city's vision has changed quite a bit. And as such, that's one of the reasons why we're looking at making major revisions to it at this time. In 2015, one step towards realizing that vision is the city adopted a sustainable community strategy called Washington Realized. It primarily focused on transit-oriented development strategies, ways to establish complete communities, and a financing and implementation plan that would help achieve the city's goals. Another thing that was occurring at that time was the city was working on updating its general plan. That project, as some of you are aware that were here at that time, took many years to complete, but it was eventually adopted by the City Council in late 2016. And also, as a portion of that, after the general plan was adopted, the city subsequently also completely revamped its zoning ordinance as a portion of completing the general plan. In 2018, the city completed a major infrastructure project in the Washington area. It improved pedestrian, bike, and parking amenities, as well as streetscape amenities along several roadways in the district. There were many areas where utilities were undergrounded, and the main goals of that project were to help begin the transformation of the district into the vibrant area that was envisioned in Washington Realized. So with all that, the city began the process of updating the Washington Specific Plan in 2018 to build on these other things that had come before it. We began the process by selecting a consultant to assist us. Next slide, Katie. With the update, Ultimately, the team from Ascent Environmental was chosen to help us work on the project. The updated plan will incorporate much of what was developed during the Washington Realized project and will provide additional framework for land use, urban design, and architectural guidelines, along with guidelines for dealing with the historic buildings in the district. We'll also deal with strategies on what to do with parking in the district and establishing the exact vision for the district. As part of the update process, next slide, Katie, we did hold a workshop in April at Inside Coffee in the Washington District. The team from the city and the consultant group interacted with residents that came to the meeting. There were information boards present to show some of the items of emphasis that are being worked on during the plan. Also, during this approximate time, staff and the consultant were also interacting with major stakeholders in the Washington District, such as CalSTRS, to get feedback from them on items of concern that may want to be dealt with in the update of the plan. So this concludes my presentation. As I mentioned, it's just a very introductory look at the project, and we will have a much more detailed discussion at the next Planning Commission meeting. But if you have any questions, myself or Mr. Tilley will be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Kathy. This is a public workshop, so we're here to take public comments on this, as well as comments from the commission, but there is no official hearing this evening. So with that, I'll just open the public comment period. Are there I actually have no comments from the public. So are there any comments of the commissioners to staff? Ms. Austin?
I'd like to get a little bit of clarity. What are some of the staff's or management or the council's goals in this update? I mean, certainly we've established that it's been some time. It's apparent that, a lot of change has happened in this community, not just since it was first adopted, but even since 2015. So are there any particular goals?
Yeah, the council really reaffirmed, the original vision in Washington through the Washington Realized effort. And the current plan to this day, in my view, still has good bones. But it is a little lacking on the implementation, side of things. And, quite frankly, the state of the art certainly has changed, somewhat since that time. So the the area will continue to be planned for a, urban, mixed-use area, fairly eclectic. It's a different animal than what we had in Bridge District, which was, essentially a completely clean slate. This area here, there's obviously many existing residents and businesses over there. So what we're really trying to work on is better strategies to help achieve that vision with better architectural criteria, better historic preservation criteria, things that the plan right now really lacks, and also certain things that the Washington Realized effort, by nature of the parameters of the grant that funded that, really couldn't get into. And historic preservation and design guidelines, I think, being two of the biggest ones where the current plan is lacking, and then Washington Realized that was sort of outside its scope as defined by the grant. So we're very much excited about getting some better tools. I think commissioners may recall some of the projects we've brought forth to you over the last couple of years have needed numerous exceptions and deviations, and that's just really not how we want to really do things. Those things should be, done, I think, in a limited basis, not every single time we come forward to you. So we want to have better tools, especially since under our new zoning code, when there were other entitlements required, the Planning Commission is also going to be doing design review. where in the past, we've always told you no. Well, now you're going to be the design review body when someone's coming forth to you for a map or a variance or some other form of entitlement. So we also want to make sure the Planning Commission has tools available to it, especially when it comes to design review, which is inherently challenging especially if you don't have good objective, criteria by which to go from. And I think that's particularly acute when we're in a neighborhood where there are existing historic buildings that we want to make sure we maintain and preserve, but also continuing to advance the ball in that neighborhood because it has incredible potential. And we're seeing some of that, realizing with, CalSTRS Phase 2, River One project that will come to the commission in probably in a couple of months, and a few others that maybe are sort of, brewing out there. So I would say, in summary, that the overall vision remains consistent with what was identified in the original specific plan at that time, but we are fleshing that out more and getting better tools and just more contemporary tools. So make sure we can continue to have that infill development in our community, which really goes a lot toward what we'll talk about in our next item. So right now, it's not easy to do projects over there because we lack a lot of fundamentals that would really help make those projects run a little smoother and hopefully require less exceptions from the commission.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. So I'll try not to talk too long. The two areas that I think about are mobility and parking, and then also design review. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So being the second longest serving planning commissioner, which is kind of funny to me, so yeah, just referencing some of the things that we've heard in public comment. One is design review really matters, and it doesn't just matter for historic areas, and it doesn't just matter for the waterfront, but it matters a lot for both of those particular types of properties, but also existing residents. Like you said, it looks very different there. There's not like a similar template, which is both good and bad, and so I would definitely appreciate both some guidance on design review, but also really honoring that flexibility. And I'm thinking specifically of the whole discussion we had during the ZOMP process around the fencing. So just kind of, let's keep that in our minds when we're working on this. And then the other is the mobility and parking. So that's another piece of feedback we've gotten from folks is there's a community concern about areas being underparked. And I also want to recognize not just existing businesses and residents, but also who would be coming to this area and making sure that we are accommodating many different types of businesses, many different types of commerce, and many different types of populations who have lived here and would like to continue to live here and would live here in the future. So I think that we can definitely be aggressive with hitting some of our sustainability goals around parking, but also making sure that we're recognizing, again, existing residents, existing businesses, et cetera. And I can get into that more, but I won't right now. And then also the transportation kind of mobility piece is just key. This hits really key corridors. I Street Bridge, Grand Gateway, there's a lot going on there and things are moving so fast, it will be hard to say exactly what kind of mobility we need to accommodate for. So I'm definitely interested in those things being addressed in the Washington specific plan. And then also for future reference, I think that sometimes notices might go out on like next door or to residents, but if it's something that would be reasonable for some major things like ZOMP or some like Washington specific plan, could you let us know when public meetings are? I'm not saying I'm going to attend, I probably won't even attend most of them, but I would like to know about there's several that I haven't necessarily been on my radar.
Yeah, we can certainly let the commission know when those are coming. There's nothing, scheduled immediately, but when we have a little more content, will be our next time we'd be going out. And there is also a project website that I'd like to shamelessly plug right now, which is called planwashington.city. Planwashington.city is a way you can communicate with us, get all the updates as well, and we'll be loading more and more content on there. And for this particular area, we've also been trying to deploy different methods of communication. And so for our last couple of ventures out into that community, we've done some postcard mailings to the whole neighborhood. Just a way to get people, get folks, at least, hey, there's something coming up. And, the postcards are also, fairly inexpensive, and it's a good way to get it to everyone. And those can also go to occupants, not just property owners. Which is, very important in this neighborhood, because I think it's only about a quarter owner occupied.
Great, thank you. Those are my comments for now.
Commissioner Leonard?
Mr. Tilley, what's happening with the streetcar, and how will that relate to what is happening in the planning document, revision and mobility sections?
Well, I think it's fairly well understood that the streetcar has run into some challenges of late, and the mobility objectives that the streetcar was intended to provide remain the same. It's a matter of how we may be looking at meeting those objectives in a different way. But this area still needs a robust, mobility network and options. I'm not confident right now the streetcar, at least as it has been considered over the last 10 years, will happen in that same manner. But its objectives remain out there, and our transportation folks in Public Works, along with Sacramento, are looking at different ways they may be able to meet some of those objectives. Being fully cognizant of it, that we've been working on the streetcar for so long, well, the whole mobility space has changed immeasurably. Try to think about, it wasn't even that long ago when things like Uber and Lyft didn't even exist. And now, how could we live without them? And jump bikes and scooters. So I'm not optimistic that the streetcar would proceed the way it has been conceived, but some form of enhanced transit would still be available in this neighborhood and elsewhere in our city. The need is still there, it just could be met in a different way.
Thank you.
Mr. Sternfeld?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Allen, thank you for the presentation. A couple questions. Back to the public workshop, can you give us a sense of just how many folks were there or participated?
We had approximately 25 members of the community show up at the workshop.
And will we be doing additional public workshops as the plan development moves forward?
We will have additional ones as things firm up a little more.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we also had a presence at the Lantern Festival, which we got a lot of interest there, mostly about what was going on and how people could get involved.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Tilley. Can I ask, Ms. Allen, can you go back to slide 2 where you had the map? Thank you. Thank you, Katie. So just in looking at this map, and we've already approved a lot of projects in this area, and there's also been a lot of development in the last 20 years in this area. And so I'm trying to get a sense of scope of applicability. So we're undertaking a pretty big effort to modernize the Washington specific plan, which I think makes sense. But I'm trying to figure out, what percentage of this area would that actually apply to based on existing buildings, infrastructure, and buildings built in the last 20 years or even 15 years, and then what we know is kind of coming down the pike. Do we have a sense of that at this point, or is that something that we would look at further down the line?
Are you asking how much of it is actually vacant as opposed to having?
Not even vacant, but projects that haven't been approved by us. So I can think of at least several half-block or almost full-block projects that this commission's approved in the past couple of years. And I'm imagining that any update to this plan wouldn't impact those previously approved projects. So I'm trying to figure out, what are the areas of expected development we have in the future that would actually be impacted by the changes to the specific plan? And are they in a certain area? They're clearly not so much along the waterfront, but maybe some of them are closer, kind of on the other side of the railroad tracks between Insight and the tracks. But I'm just trying to figure out where would this new criteria apply, and how would that impact the overall kind of feeling of the community based on what was already approved and been built, what's been approved and we're hoping is going to happen, and then what we expect to happen in the future.
In terms of the area of impact, I can't off the top of my head give you an exact number, but I know that I've seen an exhibit from our consultants that dealt with somewhat that topic, so we can go back and take a look at it and get a sense for you of
Yep.
how large the impact is.
Yeah, Washington Realize had a sort of a kind of an opportunity site map, and we've refined that a little bit through this with a few things that have come down the pike, since that plan was adopted. So that will be something we'll be sure to bring to our next meeting, because it is more than what it might seem, particularly when you think about when the I Street Bridge, the viaduct is gone, it opens up a whole new site that's not even available right now. And there's the whole Tower Court property, there's the whole, what do we call that other?
Street.
Well, there's the whole square block off Fifth Street, and then there's also the whole former Welcome Grove property. So
Flores,
it does tend to, and then there's the stuff along East Street, so it does tend to add up. So we'll provide that graphic, and it should make it a little more clear about how much opportunity there still remains in this neighborhood.
Sure, and certainly, no, don't assume that my comments suggested that there isn't opportunity or sites in this area that still need to be developed or redeveloped. I think what I'm trying to figure out is context. When we shift, and particularly, Mr. Tilley, because you mentioned earlier that we could be doing better when it comes to criteria for historic preservation and design guidelines, if those are changing from what the status quo is, I want to know what the impact is. So if we have a site in the bottom left corner and a site in the top right corner, and then we have all this stuff in between that's already been developed, how is it going to connect to one another if design guidelines have changed? And maybe the design guidelines are becoming more lenient, or maybe they're becoming stricter. I don't think we got a sense from that from the presentation. So and you don't have to answer this now, but when you come back, I want to have a sense of how does the sites that are remaining to be developed, or we think are opportunity sites, and the changes that we're making to the plan connect to what has already happened? And how do we understand that kind of visually when we move from one block to another through the community?
Yeah, we can provide more detail on that.
Thank you. And then, question for Mr. Tilley. You mentioned earlier that the existing plan was lacking on implementation. Can you just dig in a little more or explain a little more on what you meant by that?
Yeah, well, it didn't really it had some illustrations for infrastructure, but not a lot of concrete information about that. So that's, sort of been fleshed out along the way with the big infrastructure project we designed out there. It's really, it has virtually nothing in it about guidance when it comes to historic preservation. It has some policy statements about historic preservation is good, but it gives very little tools or guidance into how to actually do that. And the architectural guidelines are very limited, and it really reflects, in my view, certain architectural styles that are not only not appropriate now, but were never even existed in this neighborhood. There's some stuff in there about mission-style buildings, for example, in the current plan those are probably not right for this area. So we just need some better tools on those things, and to help address better stuff about parking and where refuse things can go. All those things really matter when you're dealing with a small infill area as opposed to, say, a greenfield where it's maybe less critical. So the plan has served us well. I do believe the policy goals and the framework of it remain very much valid today, but it would help all of us when we're working with projects to have some additional tools and criteria to work with, and to help us when we're bringing projects forward to the commission, especially now that you'll be in the design review seat, to help you with those decisions when those projects come before you.
Awesome, thank you. The specific example on the mission-style buildings very much helps me understand what the types of things you're looking at, and hopefully the public too. I just had a couple more points if the chair and my colleagues will entertain me for another moment. Can you talk about any goals around parking? So I know, I think about the building that's going up on 3rd and C right now. then, and parking was a big issue there, and we've heard about parking time and time again. There's also underutilized parking owned by CalSTRS and private entities. So I just, what is the thought, the goal, the approach to thinking about parking in this updated plan?
Yeah, parking certainly has been, raised in this neighborhood in many different, contexts. We do have an inventory of all the available, on-street parking in that area. It's more than what, at least numerically, it's a lot more than what you might think it is. And Washington Realized also did identify a potential location for another public garage. It does seem like there's maybe getting a little headway about making some additional existing parking resources more available than they have been historically. So we will absolutely be looking at that because some form of pooled and public parking is going to be essential, especially for some of the smaller infill projects. I could see us looking at some parking in lieu fee options. So that's very much something that we're in the thick of now, and we'll have some more detail for you. But it's very much going to be, I think, a key plank in this overall specific plan, because that's another area where the current plan doesn't give us too much guidance. It just points back to the zoning ordinance, and that's great. But I think, we need to be more creative on parking in this day and age, and hopefully some of those existing parking resources can become more available to the general public as time goes by.
Great. Thank you. The last thing I had is more of a request. And I don't know to what extent the current plan is going to be completely rewritten or just edited and modified. But as we see more details on drafts of changes or whatever form it ends up taking, I would really appreciate if we can get some kind of like summary document that shared with us the changes between the current plan and the new plan, kind of like, this is what the current plan said on this is what the new plan is proposing to say on this, so that as we go through the review process, it can be really clear to us what are the big changes or the things we need to focus on. We did that with ZOMP kind of at the end, but I think it was something that the commission actually had requested at the beginning, was like, okay, as we go through it, can we redline it? Like what, and I don't know if redlining is the right process for this document, because it may be a whole new document, but whatever it is, I want to make sure that as we're working through this, we have a really clear understanding of kind of what the previous plan said and what we're proposing to change in the new plan. But more of a request. You don't have to, you can validly answer, but you don't have to.
We can do something like that for you as we bring this forward to you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm really excited about this. I think there's definitely a needed cleanup and improvement on the existing plan, and some issues that we've tackled, like parking, where we didn't have a lot of guidance, or historic preservation, where we didn't have a lot of guidance in the past. If we can make those clearer and more consistent across the board in our approach, that's all good. So I appreciate the work being done on this. I look forward to seeing it back. And thank you, colleagues, for indulging my lengthy questions.
Commissioner Berliner?
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much for this presentation. I really look forward to next meeting's, full-on presentation. Just one question about parking. Will there be any, and if you don't know this, that's totally chill. Sorry, I'm like allergies. Will there be anything about clean parking, so parking for electric vehicles? Will there be, is that something that the plan would specify? Just because Westack has some public chargers, but not many.
It is something that will be addressed in some form in the plan, yes.
Okay, now I'm really excited. I was really excited before, but I'm excited now. All right, thanks.
I'm sorry, can I ask a follow-up question? Are we expecting the requirements to be above and beyond what we approved in the general plan,
No,
or consistent with?
consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Boo? Okay. Currently, the public comment period is still open. We're on item number 2 for those who just walked in. However, I still have no request to speak. So I'm going to close the public comment period, and I'll wrap up by thanking staff for this presentation. I am excited to see this. I did actually attend some of the older meetings when we were still working off of the Washington specific plan. I have the yellowed hard copy still at my house. I think Ms. Austin identified some of the points that I've struggled with of the current plan, which is that it's lacking clear guidance on design standards. And so one thing with this plan, I think you've tried to capture the need for flexibility moving forward, but also identify specifics. Because there was wiggle room in the old plan where you like emulate the character of the neighborhood. But that was very difficult to apply, and we're going to be asked to apply that. It's very difficult to apply because the character of the Washington neighborhood is so diverse, depending on what era your house was built. This is our oldest neighborhood. The Washington area is a very special place to our city, and I think we should do what we can to not only preserve it, but enhance it and maintain that character while, continuing to make it an even more special place. There's an art to mixing the old with the new, and so I think, it's a little delicate balance between newer construction and the design standards, and I think you've tried to capture some of the points that I heard echoed all the time with the current, I would say old plan, but the current plan. It's emulating the character of the neighborhood, but rather than saying that, you have contemporary or modern architecture, but displaying traditional elements. Again, emulate the existing neighborhood buildings. So this is where, I'm sure we're going to see more details to help define what does that mean, because there are so many different types. The transition zone, I like the clarity on that because there's a separation between architecture and then the design. So maintaining the historic feel by keeping those architectural elements in, it would be appreciated. So I had one more. So I think this evening we heard about parking, we heard about circulation, we heard about design. Would you like to hear about anything else from us?
And can I add in one more thing that I'd like, that's slightly related to the specific plan?
Sure.
So I don't think this is going to appear in the specific plan, but it really, if we didn't address this in a setting like this, I think we would be remiss. So something that I know is on the radar of our city staff, our mayor, and our council is potential displacement issues. And so when you look at other places that are in our town that are really facing pretty significant development, they are industrial areas, and there aren't mass residences where people could potentially be displaced. This is an area that we know has been and will continue to increase in property value, and we have a lot of renters, and we have a lot of low-income people who live here. And so I really want to be thoughtful in balancing, making improvements, making public investment that encourages more private investment, and yet finding a way to really honor the folks who currently live there. Strategies that we might want to look at are affordable housing development that matches displacement or loss of units at a certain rent level. That's one strategy. Another strategy would be to look at our code enforcement strategies. There are properties there they're in the area that I am certain have some code violations, and are there ways that we can work with residents or property owners to get their homes up to code and make it places that they'd be proud to live in that are supportive rather than punitive? So those are just two strategies that may be outside of the scope of the Washington specific plan, but I want to make sure that those are things that are definitely on the radar and on the record for things that I think that we as a city value.
Okay. With that, we will move on to agenda item number 3, which is a public workshop and presentation on, I'm sorry, I lost my place. There we go. On the proposed climate action plan. Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to do for you. It's a somewhat modified version of what I presented to the Mayor's Commission on climate change fairly recently, but have drilled it into West Sacramento in our region a little more. I also left for you today 2 articles that have come out related to climate change, including one that just came out this week from UC Davis. And this is not surprising. The author of this made a similar presentation at one of those Mayor's Commission meetings about how if we continue on our current path by 2100, our climate here will be like Phoenix is. And that really resonated at that meeting, because as much as this climate change is an extremely complex topic, when you put it in terms like that I think most everyone can appreciate, it really got people's attention. And as much as I know that I won't be here in 2100, I like to think my kids and grandkids will, and that's why this stuff remains being very important. And so also, the other thing that shows how this has evolved is we're no longer still calling it a cap, but really climate action in and of itself is clearly not enough anymore. We have to realize the fact that it is occurring, and we have to learn to cope with it, or in this case, be resilient. It shows a level of evolution in this just over the last 10 years that has evolved, frankly, faster than anything I've seen in our particular, in this field. So background slide, I'm sure everyone is well familiar with where we're located. The things here that really matter to us is we are in PG&E territory as opposed to SMUD. It's a different animal, and so we need to be working on that. I think it's quite notable that PG&E does not have a seat at the Mayor's Commission on climate change, which is making things for us a little more challenging, because everything is, SMUD this and SMUD that, and that's wonderful, but we're not on SMUD in our community, so we have to translate that into PG&E speak, so to speak. And even though we are a relatively small community, I think we're very diverse from our landforms, and even though we're in the heart of the region, we still have a lot of different industries and a lot of different transportation needs. All of these things relate back into climate change. In our region, the transportation sector is over half the emissions total inventory in our region. So even though we are relatively small, we still have a lot of transportation needs in our community, and a lot of different industries, residences of all different types, and all of these things, kind of make this more of a challenge. But I'm hoping by the end of this we can see this effort that we're going to get into as an opportunity. And we also, of course, are a growth community. So one would think that growing is not good from a climate standpoint, and I would argue that growing the right way can be good for a climate standpoint. And since so much of our growth in our community is focused on infill, and which is, in theory, a low VMT, and the growth that we have been programmed for is aligned well from a regional standpoint on a climate basis. So our main objective would be to try to reduce our emissions on a per capita basis, because they still may go up in total as we grow, but you have to look at that in the context of, if those X 20 or 30,000 people were essentially being, in a more low density, more around the periphery of the region, what that would mean from an emission standpoint versus having that be focused on more of an infill basis. So hopefully you can see this on your screens. This is this is a chart I pulled from NASA. It really goes back in time in terms of carbon levels, and I think it goes back to 800,000 years ago on the far left. And then on the far right, it shows 1950 until present day. And so you can see how that it's pretty much gone up exponentially just in the last, half century or so. And this is clearly a big challenge for us. It's not a problem in 2100, it's a problem now. And this here was an article that just came out in the Bee just this week, talking about how this summer was, even though, at least to me, it didn't feel like an especially hot summer, overall, it was still the third hottest summer in our region on record, going back about 150 years or so. So it's just an indication of, that in our region, obviously, heat is a particular challenge for us, and it will likely continue to be a challenge, and an even bigger challenge for us, especially if we continue on our path. And if we were already, this summer was the third hottest already, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go next? So, which brings us to our work here on what we want to do in our climate action plan, in our community. We prepared a first draft one in 2009 when these things were in their infancy. Steve Paddock, who was our community development director, had retired, came back right after that, and was basically writing our CAP for us and learning as he went. Things were in its infancy then. And we were also then working on general plan. Of course, that was also in the recessionary era, so we made a lot of progress there. That plan was really well done at the time, but the state of the art has, significantly, passed it in this last decade. So we updated our inventory 4 or 5 years ago to see where we're at, and we were ready to go on the CAP and adopt it with general plan. And the Newhall Ranch case came out, sort of threw us for a loop there a little bit. So we've, CAP now is more of an implementation measure of the general plan. And also, what's most important and why we're here tonight is it's now on the council's strategic priority list that's over there for 2019, is to finally complete our CAP. And if it sounds like I'm passionate about this topic, it's because I am. And I've been working on it since 3:30 straight, so I'm excited. Even though we don't have a current CAP, it doesn't mean we haven't been doing things in our community related to sustainability. This is just, some of the highlights, and you can see the PV on City Hall and a little bit across the street. It's one of many things, we fortunately around West Sacramento here is, we don't need to plan things to death. When we have a good idea to do something, we're often able to do it. We didn't need a plan to have us do VIA and jump and things like that. We put the commission and council put SB 743 thresholds into the general plan, 3 years ago, well ahead of most, and we have been applying them since. Even though they've only officially gone into effect, I think this July 1. And I think most importantly, especially some of our more longer-serving commissioners, in the past, in those salad days when things were booming, there was a lot of pressure for a lot of annexations and other things in our community, and our Planning Commission and Council have resisted those efforts over the years, noting that we have quite a bit of land still to go in Southport, and it's still a tremendous amount of infill and refill opportunities. So any annexations, if they were ever to occur, are likely in the 2100 realm, if anything like that. So, as I mentioned, transportation is by far our biggest contributor in our region, so that's definitely needs to be an area of focus for us. There's a lot of things that go into it. It's a lot more than just, having electric vehicles and buses and things. It's really just trying to sort of interrupt the life cycle, if you will, in VMT. And so one of the things that we've come to realize, recently is as much as our proximity to the job center, regionally makes us a fairly low VMT area, and VMT being vehicle miles traveled. And we have a pretty good jobs housing balance. When you sort of look into that a little deeper, we really don't. Only about 12% of our residents actually work here in West Sacramento. So we're exporting almost 90% of our workforce. And then conversely, we're importing a significant amount of workers into our community. So what that all means is that's all VMT. So it's another example of how almost anything we're working on can be traced back to climate. If we're recruiting employers here, and employers that have the kind of jobs, that have the kind of wages that align with our real estate prices, and thus make it more feasible for their workers to also live here in West Sacramento, that's not just good from an economic development standpoint, it's good from a VMT standpoint, which means it's good from a climate standpoint. So this will be a particular effort in our climate efforts, as it has been for a long time, to try to have multiple mobility options, reduce VMT, and thus reduce emissions and congestions on our roadways. So some of the key elements of our CAP work is we'll need to update our inventory to get it to be probably a 2016 vintage. So that'll be our new baseline. There's several different items. One of the areas I'm particularly interested in and want to draw attention to is our work in this space as it relates to disadvantaged communities. By the CalViralScreen metric, quite a large percentage of our community is qualified as being disadvantaged based on those various metrics. And there's no doubt that disadvantaged persons may be disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change. We're already seeing it now, even just with heat. We all know how expensive it is to run an air conditioner on those hot days and the peak afternoons. We have many folks in our community that just can't do that because they can't have a $300 or $400 bill. So some of those things are already happening. So our CAP work, and which will also then lead into our environmental justice element that we'll need to put into the general plan, we'll need to take particular attention to disadvantaged communities, and also, recognizing that different persons' abilities to help with climate change can come in different ways. Being able to put solar on your house is a wonderful thing, and we're seeing many people do it constantly around town, but that type of thing, we can't hang our hat on that because that may be out of reach for a large percentage of our community, or buying an EV or this or that. So we have to be very cognizant of our community's capacity to do some of these things, and not just assume that everyone will be able to put solar on their roof, because that may not be possible for everyone. But firmly believe that everyone in our community, regardless of their economic status, can do something to help with reducing our emissions and helping with climate change. And then another aspect of this that's very important that's come up just as I was actually writing the RFP for our consultant is an executive order came down from the governor's office, taking this to a whole nother level, which is carbon sequestration. So part of our efforts is we will need to be identifying areas where we can hopefully permanently sequester carbon. It's to show the evolution of where this started with just trying to reduce emissions, and then we went to, okay, well now we have to accept that some level of climate change is occurring, so we have to be resilient to it. And now it goes to the third level, which is carbon is there, it's being emitted, we have to figure out how we can sequester it in our communities. So it just shows the rapid evolution. And stakeholder engagement, I want to draw particular attention on this note because this is more than your more standard, community outreach. We want to do some case studies through this effort. This is something that's sort of arisen out of the Mayor's Commission work, where that effort kind of got off on the wrong foot as it started off being super top-down and very regulatory. The only way this effort is going to succeed is if we get maximum community buy-in from our residents and businesses. So as part of our CAP efforts, we'll be doing some stakeholder engagement and case studies to where we're going to go to some of our businesses and also some of our residents who have made certain improvements or done certain things at their businesses, and so we can document how those things have been working for them and what the payoffs hopefully have been, and try to identify positive examples that are already out in our community that others may be able to learn from, or if others who are maybe on the fence about doing this or that, we can go out there because we know there are positive examples out there. Large and small, and so we really want to be able to get that information and be able to show people that if you do these things, if you can do these things, there can be positive results. So this is, so we will be, doing a lot of our normal engagement. Climate touches everything, so we'll be needing to make visits to multiple city commissions and the council. And as I mentioned, we'll be doing some of the traditional public workshops on this, also the stakeholder work. And one of the things we're most excited about, some of the technologies that are out there, we'll be able to put a lot of this stuff on the city website. It'll be a dashboard about our emissions, our inventory, what our progress is as we implement various GHG reduction measures. And we very much are going to take a particular effort into getting into some of our disadvantaged communities and going to people where they are, because this is, if there's anything we need to do where we need maximum community input and contact and participation, it's working on climate. because it absolutely, affects all of us, but not always in the same ways. So we will continue to move forward. One of the efforts, especially referencing sort of in that lower left corner, we really do want to be trying to mainstream our climate efforts, at least from the city operations standpoint. Climate should be baked into sort of our DNA, if you will, and how we do business and how we make decisions. As we go forward in this, climate is obviously huge. It has major impacts on our public health and also on our economy. So we really want to be using this as an appropriate lens in our decision-making. This will be an ongoing effort. This won't be a plan that sits on the shelf. It's meant to be a living, breathing document. And we will be bringing many of these elements forward to the Planning Commission and other commissions as we make progress. So, So basically, we did an RFP out, that finished. We actually finished our last consultant interview today, so we should be able to make a selection probably tomorrow on who we're going to go with. This will be, probably take about a year to do, plus or minus. And clearly, we will glean as much as we can from the Mayor's Commission work as that continues to progress and evolve. They're looking at a lot of different topics and now subtopics of those topics. And of course, there's bound to be more legislation that comes down the pike on this, more executive orders, things like that. So we're going to do whatever we can to stay on top of those and keep this plan contemporary so that we can indeed make a difference on this particular effort in our community, and then hopefully be a positive example in the region and the rest of the state on how to take this serious problem and turn it into hopefully an opportunity, and not just looking at these types of articles, which I provided to you. If you look at these in a vacuum, you could basically say we're doomed. We're not doomed, and we're going to do what we can here to not have these things happen, or at least not have them happen as severely as they possibly could. So I think that's the end of my presentation, so I'd be happy to answer any questions on this one. Your input is important on this because I've sort of relayed the general scope of how we want to approach this, and your input will be important when I go to council for a contract award, having had the commission's input on just the sort of the overall premise of how we're going to try to complete our climate action plan. So now I could go on all night about this, but I'll stop now, and if there's any questions anyone has.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tilley. Before we start going around and before I open up the public comment period, can you describe how would we integrate this into our policies, plans?
Well, some of the higher level stuff will need to reside in the safety element of the general plan. And we have some stuff in there already. There was a new bill, SB 379, that was passed, I think, in this last session. So we'll need to identify some of our vulnerability and resiliency that would come with that vulnerability into general plan. And then it also already currently resides in the hazard mitigation plan. That's the county-wide effort that we have. And then also, as a subset of this, which came to us through the Delta Stewardship Council, they're actually going to have a Civic Sparks Fellow do a vulnerability assessment for us. So we're very grateful for that, and that work will start soon. So we'll gather all that information. Some of it will go a higher level, will be in general plan. The rest of it, I hope, would reside in the CAP, since the CAP update we could do much more nimbly than if we had to update the whole general plan itself. Mm-hmm. High level there, and then this will be more the implementation of those higher level policies that are in the general plan and updated.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public comment period at this time, although I have no comments to speak, or I'm sorry, no requests to speak at this time. So I'll bring it back to the commission. I don't think I'd go anywhere. I'm going to sit down. If you go sit down, there's nobody to talk to. So. I'll go to my left this time, Commissioner Sternfels.
So, Mr. Tilley, maybe a broad question, but outside of updating the CAP, what is the most important thing based on your time spent on this topic that we should be thinking about planning for is kind of maybe a concern or worry that as a city we should be planning for that maybe we're not right now?
Well, I would say that the most critical path to get success on this is getting a broad understanding throughout the community of people's day-to-day decision-making as it may relate back to climate. Decisions we make every day can go move the needle one way or the other. So this will be a large educational effort, I believe, and I really want to construct the plan in a way where I don't care if anyone reads it cover to cover, but if they only read the first 10 pages, I want them to have a good takeaway of what, in day-to-day life, what you could be doing in day-to-day life or your decision-making. We need just maximum community buy-in on this stuff, even if it's something as simple as, shaving 30 seconds off your shower in the morning. That doesn't just save water, it saves energy, which thus saves emissions. So I'm hoping we can get folks to understand those relationships more so than perhaps they do now, so that they can, put this into their calculus of how they make decisions.
And just one more question. So I know a lot of it's focused on climate change and heat, but with that comes oftentimes extreme weather, and we're essentially a peninsula surrounded by water on 3 of our 4 sides, and so I'm wondering how will this work in planning integrate into existing and future flood protection plan efforts, and I guess for me the biggest concern is dramatic changes as a result of climate change. So it's one thing if the temperature goes up 5 degrees, and that's substantial and worth noting and dealing with, but if it also results in West Sac being 4 feet underwater, then we're not doing much good from a planning perspective now.
Well, and that is why these days I am now proposing to call this not only climate action but resiliency, because we have to accept the fact that some of these things may very well be occurring and may be irreversible. So it's how can we cope with them, be resilient. I know that the work that the WSAFCA did and their EIR for the flood program did what they could to account for the potential effects of climate change as it relates to flood protection. And that's also part of the hazard mitigation plan that, we have. But it's heat is usually the sort of the lowest hanging fruit, and what we talk about a lot because it's very tangible to everyone. And there's no doubt it feels like it's getting hotter, generally speaking, and more frequent hot days. Flood risk is absolutely a potential issue. The article I provide in here was about a statewide flood risk. It wasn't unique to our region per se, but I think some of the lessons are there that if, climate change won't cause flooding by itself, but if it causes other weather events that lead to flooding, then we could easily have a problem. So that's why we continue to be diligent on getting our flood protection up to snuff, and not annexing more floodplain land, just compounding our problem. But that's really what's going to come out of the vulnerability assessment and the resiliency effort is what can we realistically do to help reduce those kinds of risks, and if the risks are out there, how can we cope with them as best we can? But that is there's many other aspects of climate change that could be these are two probably the most near and dear to us is the heat and potential flood risk. So that has been accounted for to the extent possible through the levee work now, and will continue to be accounted for as the understanding of those risks and the effects of climate change become better understood as they relate to flood risk.
Sure, and I appreciate that, and I realize in terms of this regional group, both of those topics may be important, but to me it feels like the flood protection may be just a bit more important for West Sac in particular, given the water that surrounds us on 3 sides. And so I would only emphasize the point that if there's an area in which, if there are things we need to look at again, whether it's West Safeca's plans and the future of flood protection in the city, or what we have now and where we're going and how we're getting there, to me that's That's the most important part of this, because the temperature changing by 5 degrees, every citizen in West Sacramento can turn down their AC and use less water, and that's not going to impact the world's climate. But a major change in water levels and failure of levees and those things would dramatically impact this community. And so I think if there's an area in this that we really need to focus and dial in on, although it's probably super meaty and complicated and hard and painful and slightly boring in terms of the contents, it's the flood protection side for me again. And I know we've done a lot of work there, so we feel like we're really strong, but we're really strong for the immediate. We're not really strong for 2100. Based on what we think is going to happen. So I want to emphasize the point that flood protection to me is probably the most important part of this.
Oh, absolutely, at our local level, yes. Clearly, it's a global problem, but the effects of it will be different in different areas. So for us, flood risk and extreme heat events and even potential wildfire are probably our big three, if you will, for us. But I agree that, it's, if you're underwater, who cares how hot it is outside, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Berliner?
Hi, Mr. Tilley, thank you. So this is sort of a topic that's near and dear to my heart. How do you expect that the consultant and the city will engage people in DACs?
Well, one of the consultants we're looking at has a sub on their team that specifically works in those communities, and that's particularly appealing to us. I'm not saying we're going to go with that firm necessarily, but someone of that ilk would be very important, that someone who can speak the language of the people in there, because I'll be the first to admit they're probably not going to listen to me. So we need to work through the existing networks that are out there, be it the BB Cans, some of the other, groups that are out there to get to folks and on their level, and we need to go to them. We can't expect them to come here, and we also need to be mindful that not everybody can go on a website or, do a poll on their phone or something like that. And we also need to be conscious about multiple languages. All of those things are going into the pie here, because admittedly, this is an area that's always challenging for us, but this is also probably one of the most critical times to reach those communities as best we can. And so we have a variety of tools, and we're going to try everything we can because, one, it's important, but two, those folks are most vulnerable in our community for the most part. So it's imperative that we reach them and try to do what we can to help them do better understand this and then better be able to cope with it.
And to follow up with that, from that, are you guys going to also work with low-income communities?
Oh, yeah, we have to. I mean, there's nothing more citywide, than this particular effort, and we really do need to get to some of our most vulnerable communities, but also just being cognizant of where they're at and what things they may be able to do and may not be able to do. If we went out and said everyone has to, put solar on their house or completely re-insulated or all those kind of things, that may be out of reach for a lot of folks, especially folks who live in rental housing, and where, as much as they may want to put solar on the roof, they don't own the house, so they can't. So we have to be cognizant of those things first and foremost, and we're trying to keep those in the forefront.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Booth?
Good afternoon, good evening, I guess. So as the consultants will be updating the cap, have you and the consultants, will you be looking at best practices from across the country and from across the globe? And are there any that you've identified so far?
Not so much yet, but we absolutely will be out there. If we don't have to reinvent the wheel, we won't, but this is also such a rapidly evolving, space that even something that somebody thought of maybe 1 or 2 years ago might not be best practice now. But we also want to identify what makes sense for our community and what things we can realistically implement in our community. We have to be aggressive on this, but at the same time, we have to be realistic about what our capacities are, and economically and, service-wise and everything. So I think it's, there's a needle to thread there, but I believe we can do it. And it's critical for our community and our long-term, economic viability, and especially for our lower income and more vulnerable residents.
Great. Last question. Are our regional neighbors doing anything similar to what we want to achieve here?
Sacramento is updating its cap currently. Woodland has a fairly fresh cap done only about 2 years ago. There is a proposal on the table right now for a regional inventory of emissions for all the cities in Yola County. We may participate in that effort as well. Everyone's in a slightly different level, but one of the things that's coming up fairly soon in our region is the housing element is due in another 18 months. And what that's going to spur for a lot of people in our region is doing their environmental justice elements of their general plan. And in my view, you can't be talking about environmental justice without talking about climate. They're part and parcel. So I fully believe that our region, by virtue of being on our turn for housing element cycle, you'll see a lot of, I think, advancement in this effort, because people will be mandated under environmental justice and SB 1000. So I'm really trying to set this up to help inform our own SB 1000 work, because again, the two things are completely interrelated. All right.
Thank you.
Buckle up, folks. So first I'd like to acknowledge, I'm not sure that my fellow commissioners and anyone who might be tuning in realizes this, but David Tilley has put in an inordinate amount of work in the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative. He's done a lot of work, and he's definitely, I would say, a regional leader on this type of work. So I just really want to acknowledge all the work that you put. On top of a full-time job, you are really a regional leader and a great voice in that, so I just want to acknowledge that. So, like Mr. Tilley, I could probably talk about this forever. I'm going to really try to limit it to 5 minutes or less. Promise not to go over 15 minutes, folks. So something that I talk about this weekly and sometimes daily with my work, is that we need to look for local and regional solutions to a global crisis. And that's definitely something I imagine resonates with Mr. Tilley as well. And that's what this type of work means for me. So certainly, yes, other communities are doing a cap. They have done it, and even the ones that have been done, there's a lot of criticism because there's not a lot of implementation. It's a laundry list of things that are going wrong, and not so many ideas being proposed that are solutions, or that are solutions that are viable or address different types of populations. And so, there was a reference to the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change. I just want to talk about that for a minute. That, again, is some work that's being fostered by a statewide group called the Local Government Commission, that's really seeking to provide this model of local and regional solutions to a global crisis of climate change. And I have the fortune of sitting on one of the technical advisory committees. The one that's currently meeting is the Community Health and Resiliency Group, and I think, the only stakeholder from West Sacramento on that TAC, and I think there were like 25 people in attendance. And there were people who did some Yolo County work, but there was definitely a consensus that we need to make sure that there's more representation on behalf of West Sac in this group that's looking at resiliency, equity, health. And so these are definitely topics that are near and dear to my heart, and that I will bring back to that TAC. So if people are listening, or my fellow commissioners would like to make sure that that's getting represented, you're welcome to talk to me. On the Mayor's Commission, Councilmember Chris Ledesma is our city's representative. I'll also call out, we talked a little bit about engagement related to the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change. A student colleague of mine has been helping with what will be a youth summit. It's being held at River City High School. It is welcoming students from Sacramento and West Sacramento, and it will be on October 19th. And I believe that lunch will be provided, and if it hasn't been arranged already, transportation, they are hoping to make arrangements around that. So please tell your friends. I know that I've gotten the word out to the school board members, and they're getting the words out to their networks as well. But on that point, I want to talk a little bit more about engagement strategies, because when we talk about an environmental justice element, I would argue that the biggest component of an environmental justice element are the modes of engagement and the involvement of decision-making by people who are most impacted by those decisions. And so we're talking about disadvantaged communities, and I want to be clear with folks, in West Sacramento, we have some incredibly disadvantaged communities. The definition, the state definition of disadvantaged communities, those are not our low-income communities that everyone thinks of necessarily, like, oh, Brighton, Broderick. Our disadvantaged communities don't have a neighborhood group. They're the ones close to the port. They're the ones where you have concentrations of mobile home parks. They're the folks who are living in hotels as their homes and motels as their homes. And so I really want to make sure that we are thoughtful in reaching out to those populations, not just where we have neighborhood groups in established neighborhoods, whether it's the State Streets or Southport or Bright or Broderick. And so it's reaching out to those disadvantaged communities that definitely don't have a seat at the table. I mean, they're really hand to mouth at this point. And then also the vulnerable communities. And so I think there are different definitions, again, by the state definition. But when I think of vulnerable communities, I think of where our growth is and will continue to be demographically in our city. And I'm not as concerned about retiring baby boomers who have been working, or millennials who are at the middle or higher, upper middle class income levels. I'm worried most about the very frail seniors and youth and families, and we need to be very thoughtful. We hear great examples coming from VIA of how seniors are able to have greater freedom and flexibility by having that as a service. And then I'm sure that you all have heard that not just Sacramento Regional Transit, but YOLO Bus is also offering free transit rides for young people. That's huge. And those are the type of tidal changes, seniors taking VIA, young people having free transit, that we really have to have. So when we think about vulnerable communities, we need to be doing engagement, but also including them, but also making sure that our strategies are including their abilities and their decision-making as well. And then I wanted to hit on a couple of things that David said. I'm actually going to challenge you. The solution may not be that we need more people working in West Sacramento. I think it's fantastic that we are a bedroom community to downtown Sacramento, and we need to make sure, to the point about the streetcar, that we are creating and sustaining mobility options that help people. I mean, I live 3.5 miles from the front steps of the Capitol. And so maybe I don't need to be employed in West Sacramento. Maybe we need to make sure that, like we widened the bike lanes on Tower Bridge, and, we've partnered with, we've got now line bikes, so jump bikes and line bikes. Like, those are the kinds of things that we need to continue to foster. So thinking broadly about not just, I agree we need to look at employment here and having a good match between the types of homes and jobs that match the types of employment opportunities and demographics that would be working in these, but also supporting where employment centers are, and downtown is certainly the one that comes to the top of my mind. The other thing that I really want to underscore that folks don't necessarily realize, to your point about the housing element, is that West Sacramento and the urban parts of like the city and county of Sacramento, we are where all the housing growth has to happen. We cannot protect our agricultural lands. We can't protect the Delta. We can't protect the Causeway. We can't protect those lands that we want by building housing and businesses out there. So do you know what that statistic is? But it's something like, when you look at regional planning, downtown and downtown Sacramento, kind of midtown, downtown, Central City, and West Sac are bearing what percentage of the housing growth?
Oh, probably 30 to 40%. I mean, our share
Of
of
the
the region.
six-county region.
Yeah, our share, our number is 9,500 units, and that's a little over 6% of the overall region. 6% doesn't sound like a lot, but there's only one or two other places that have a higher percentage of the pie, than we do. So that's our regional housing needs allocation for this next housing element period, about 9,500 units, round numbers.
Thank you for that, and thank you for having that off the top of your head. We could take the show on the road. But I want to underscore that because we will and will continue to get tons of complaints about growth. There's more traffic. It's more crowded. They're building houses with no yards. We have to. We have a responsibility to our region, we have a responsibility to our state, and we have a responsibility to do this sort of dense infill development, because I'm not being dramatic when I say it's the sort of thing that's going to save our planet. So yes, we are going to have a lot more traffic, we're going to have a lot more people, and we need to find a way to mitigate that traffic, not by widening roads, but finding more ways of moving people around. And the last piece I'll say is, of course, you can tell I'm as passionate about this topic as Mr. Tilly, but I am excited to support, particularly given my experience and my passion areas, the housing element, the regional housing needs assessment, and the EJ element work moving forward. And one of the things that I've shared with Mr. Tilly too is I'm happy, and I would encourage you all too, to reach out to those resources that can help with the engagement efforts. So certainly I have connections to college students. Are there ways that these college students can assist with our engagement activities? We've got a community college right across the street. We all have great networks. And so in what ways can we leverage, our faith-based groups, our neighborhood groups to be engaged in the many types of things that we're working on: sustainable community strategy, housing, EJ element, getting the word out and having people be informed and also be able to participate in decision-making. So thank you for letting me that wasn't too long, it was less than 15 minutes.
Commissioner Leonard, would you like to follow that?
Gosh,
No, I would not like to follow that. That was excellent. Just one question, though, on interfacing with us, or the commission, as the study is being done. I see an engagement schedule or some of the tasks here that include engaging stakeholders. But so how many times will we get to look at this as it's a working document before it's time to adopt it? And I ask that question in the context of, we are all very interested in this, and we don't, from my perspective, and I'm only speaking as one commissioner, I would feel like I'm really missing out if we only get the final report and we have to vote on it that night. It's that kind of thing. So I'm just curious how that will work here with this document.
Since I make up your agendas, I frankly can bring it here as often as is practical, because this does need quite a bit of vetting. I can't just, drop the whole thing on your desk one night and say, okay,
Yeah.
well, here it is Friday afternoon, go approve it next Thursday.
Right.
That's not, it can't work that way.
Right.
So this will need to be an iterative process with the Planning Commission and probably a couple of the other commissions as well. So I expect to be here on various aspects of this, several times during this effort. I appreciate the passion that I'm hearing from the commission on this topic. And as you're up there and appointed to represent, our community, at large, it's a very important role on this, because this is clearly a community-wide thing that will hopefully yield benefit for everyone in our community. Yeah. Not just once and say, please approve. We're going to need to do more than that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have learned a lot since 2009, and I do appreciate everything that we're striving for, and it's an unfortunate truth that everything that we're including in the CAP really isn't helping us circumvent the inevitable. And so I also am very happy to see your enthusiasm of including resiliency. We've heard broad feedback from the commission this evening on the CAP and on resiliency, and we've also heard some very specifics on the CAP. I think the resiliency is extremely important. We're looking at direct changes that people are going to notice, as well as indirect changes with direct effects. For example, the number of days that we're going to see temperatures over 100 degrees. Those are going to increase dramatically. You're going to notice that. But what we might not notice is the changes in snowmelt patterns. When we say flooding, well, why is that? It's because we're going to have more rain in spring. What used to come down as snow is now going to come down as rain, and so you're going to see the runoff patterns change dramatically. So we talk about flooding in the general sense, but that is an effect that we're going to see as well. To mitigate these, it's going to be expensive. I think that's one thing that we need to acknowledge right off the bat. There are things that we need to do to, again, circumvent worsening of climate change, but what do we do to prepare for what's coming our way? And just a couple examples, you brought up shade. I think that's a great idea. If we're talking about shade, we need to be talking about water availability. Right now, we're having, our cost of water in our city is just skyrocketing. We can reduce our watering of our yards, but that's actually kind of opposite of some of the goal here. So something that we could look into is how to get lower cost water to residents, for example, gray water. That would, one, reduce the energy consumption of our city because our city water plant is one of the highest consumers of electricity, as well as we'd be able to provide additional water for greenery and places for people to go to just escape the heat. We're going to need that shade along bike paths, roads, as it's going to get warmer and warmer. Flood control will continue to be a top priority of our city with or without climate change. It's just going to be more important, I think, that we continue to focus on that. So California does tend to be a leader on environmental issues, and I think our city is, right there keeping up, if not stepping up in a lot of ways. So I definitely appreciate everything that staff, that you're doing on this. So you mentioned studies, case studies.
Yes.
And one thing that popped into my head when you said that was, we sort of have a try it attitude here in West Sacramento, where if we have a good idea, sometimes we try it rather than studying it for 6 months. And so I don't know what we're trying to get out of these case studies, but given the severity of what we're facing and the inevitability of it, I would encourage us to not wait for the end of studies.
Yeah, I can give you one quick example, at least one thing I'm thinking about. It's actually my next door neighbor. He's a self-proclaimed spreadsheet nerd. He'll pull it up in his phone and show you. He has an electric vehicle, and once a month, around the middle of the month, he drives around and tries to get a sense of what the average gas price is around town. And so he puts that into his spreadsheet, and he calculates what he's spending on electricity for his EV versus what he would be spending on gas. And so he has like 3 years worth of data on that. And the long and short of it is that as long as gas is more than $1.10 a gallon, he's coming out ahead on his electric vehicle. And I think that's good real world, real data that might resonate with a few folks, especially when you look at the upfront cost of an EV as an example versus what it might cost you equivalent for gas. So that's one idea I got tooling around in my head as a case study that we could do probably in half an hour.
I can tell you, gas is more than $1.10.
It is. Not likely to be close to $1.10 again either. So, I mean, I'm trying to figure out things we can put into a real world, practical, plain language that, everybody hopefully can understand. And I like to think most people can realize that, well, gas ain't anywhere near $1.10 a gallon, and well, never will be ever again. So that's hopefully helping people with some of their decision making.
Are there any other comments? Okay, at this time, I will close the public comment period. Thank you, Mr. Tilley. And that takes us to informal discussion. Anyone?
At the last hearing, we heard from some residents who were expressing some frustration with communications on particular items. Can you give us a little update if anything has progressed on those?
Yeah, we have made a formal response to those individuals since that time. And just earlier today, we did receive a plan from the developer out there showing how they're going to complete the required improvements as part of Plan Development 21 near the detention basin. So I'm hoping that's good news, for everyone. I don't know if that matter is 100% closed yet, but we have made headway on it since our last meeting.
Okay, any other comments? With that motion to adjourn? Done, thank you.